What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I'm making this video mostly because there was this article that I read by Armando Salguero of the Miami Herald. I'm sure a lot of you know who Armando Salguero is. He's obviously a writer for the Miami Herald, but he, follows the Dolphins and has for quite some time, etc., etc., etc. So he wrote this article, and it has to do with a lot of the topics that have been surrounding the Dolphins and the draft. What are they going to do? Are they going to move up? Or who are they going to take? Blah blah blah. Right? Well, he's been tweeting out and talking not just today or recently about the fact that the Dolphins are looking to trade up potentially to the number one spot, but he has been talking about it more so, and the article that he wrote is in relation to that. Before I get to that though, just real quick, it does appear as if the NFL as of right now is still going to be pushing for the draft to go on as scheduled. OTAs are still suspended, postponed indefinitely because of the coronavirus. There is talk. I've seen some reports, some tweets, some articles, whatever. Some talk about potentially shortening the season. The owners' meeting got canceled, right? But they did approve through like a conference call or something the extended playoff bracketing, right? So the 2 extra teams and the extra game, surprise, surprise, which is supposed to take effect in 2021, the extra game, the 17th game. Surprise, surprise, they had already approved it. Why wouldn't they again? Anyway, so, there is potential for, devastating effects to the NFL season, as we've seen with some of the other sports franchises, or sports leagues, rather, I guess is really the way to say that. Basketball, NHL, baseball have all suspended in some form or fashion their season, or like spring training for baseball, etc. So, there is definitely potential for that. We'll have to wait and see. Again, as it stands, the draft is going to go on. And also, as I've said, to me, I don't see any reason why they couldn't put it on. In fact, it would make sense if they decided to do something like, televise it for free so people don't have to pay for fucking memberships or what have you. People are probably going to be sitting around come the end of April. So, I would venture to guess that there's going to be plenty of people to watch it. It might be a good idea for them to go ahead and offer some sort of free package. I did notice that like NFL Game Pass or whatever was doing like a month of free viewing, etc., which is great. They could do more, and it would show, it'd be a bigger show of faith or whatever to do it, surrounding like one of their biggest events of the year, as opposed to, NFL Game Pass is cool, but most people probably don't have that. And sure, people might go back and watch games right now because they have time, but generally people don't pour over old games all the time, I would guess. I could be wrong, but people got things to do, right? So generally, but since they have time now sitting at home, it is a good show of faith and a good gesture. But that probably would go a little bit further if they made sure that it was televised without having to have a cable package, or without having to subscribe to ESPN or whatever it is, right? Anyway, so let's go ahead and get into this though, because as it stands, the draft is still on, and I would think that they should be able to do it, do it all remotely. Obviously no big spectacle with a big crowd and stuff like that. They had already said that that's not going to be the case. But let's take a look at this, right? So what potentially are the Dolphins thinking about doing? Now, I've been talking about this for a while, right? And again, I've been saying more recently that I think that I still think probably the most likely place that they'll trade up to is the number 3 spot. But having said that, I am getting more and more convinced that the number 1 spot is where they will actually end up going to, because I mean they literally, this is what it's all been for, right? They've they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, right? They implemented all of the hallmark key fundamental things or factors or points to a tank, right? They cleared the roster, they got rid of their proven talent, etc., accumulated draft picks and capital, and then subsequently now they've blown through that cap space in free agency. They've totally, at least on paper, revamped the defense, did a little bit for the offensive line. They've done some of the things that I thought they were going to do up to this point. Free agency, spend big, focus on the offensive line and defense, so that way they can set themselves up to take a chunk of that draft capital and move up to go get whatever quarterback that it is that they want. There's also a bunch of talk about other teams gearing up to trade up for quarterbacks, etc., etc. Obviously, that's almost always, but that certainly plays into this. And Armando Salguero, I don't always agree with him by any stretch of the imagination, but he is a generally logical person from what I can tell from his reporting and so on and so forth. And he does have connections within the team, and so he has sources and people he talks to. So let's get into his article and let's take a look what he has to say. Draft's number 1 pick, which Dolphins want, can offer more nightmares than dreams come true. So in this, he's talking about how, and this is again something I've said, and why my philosophy is different than the vast majority of executives in the NFL or fans, whatever, from executives in the NFL, owners in the NFL to fans. Everybody thinks that it's all about the quarterback, just the quarterback. If you have the quarterback, then everything else is just magically going to fix because he's just going to by himself carry the team and raise the level of everybody else, etc., etc., etc. But that completely ignores tons of factors that could and oftentimes do derail that kind of plan. Right? And so again, just real quick, I would never chase a quarterback. I would never take a quarterback in round 1 or 2, but in fact, I would take a quarterback every year in round 3 or later, depending on how bad I evaluate to need one. And, do I like my starter? Do I like my backup? Or do I have nobody? Right? So, and then use your blue chip picks, your early picks, your first and second round picks, where you're going to get the best talent, where you're going to get the higher probabilities of guarantees, etc., etc. It's a smarter way. Use that to build out the rest of the team around them. So that way, and especially that way, so you can build through the draft instead of doing what the Dolphins are doing and in large part, maybe not entirely, but certainly in large part, building through free agency. They just signed 10 guys, 10 free agents. That's like a fifth of the team. And like almost all of them got massive contracts. So anyway, let's take a look at his article right quick though and see what he has to say. There's not one NFL scout or personnel man I know who believes someone other than Joe Burrow will be the number 1 overall selection in this draft. Some believe Chase Young remains the best prospect in the draft, but even they believe Burrow will be selected number 1 overall because, well, he's a quarterback, which plays to the quarterback is everything. Even though there are so many examples that quarterbacks end up being either busts or just average when they're taken in the first round, partly because of the amount of pressure that's put on, the fact that they don't get sat behind a veteran for a year, they don't redshirt, they just get thrown into the fire, etc., etc. And again, Tom Brady was not taken in the first round. There's Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, these great quarterbacks, really good quarterback, not taken in the first round. But time and time and time again, first round quarterbacks fizzle out or go, whatever. Let's continue. Where was I? Burrow's actually the most complete, most productive quarterback prospect of the 2020 draft class. And you know what that says about Burrow? Maybe he will be good in the NFL. And maybe he won't, because you just don't know. Nobody knows with any actual certainty because Burrow also comes with holes, average arm strength, and questions, one-year wonder, that any team has to grapple with. So this is where I tell you all the frustration that many or most Miami Dolphins fans experienced late last fall because their team was, here comes the unbelievable thing, winning was mostly a waste of time. So again, it totally, real quick, I'm going to pause on that for a second. It depends on what you're talking about. It's a waste of time if your aim is to get the number 1 overall pick. You want to obviously then lose everything. But if you actually want to be like a respectable team, then you're going to try and win legitimately, not just say it and then prove through your actions that you're doing the opposite, and actually go out and try to win games. And so, but winning those games certainly hurt the Dolphins' chances to, get that number 1 overall pick. And so, but again, like I said, they've been literally trying to have their cake and eat it too, because again, they literally did the hallmarks of tanking, everything that makes up, constitutes a tank job. They implemented those philosophies and executed those philosophies. And then, they left Ryan Fitzpatrick in there over Josh Rosen. So, I was wrong. I thought Josh Rosen probably would have given you the better chance to win, but I underestimated Ryan Fitzpatrick, mostly his leadership. He's got good energy and he's a good leader. Whereas, Josh Rosen always kind of seemed like Eeyore to me, very sad and mopey. And, that doesn't exactly, inspire guys in the huddle. So leaving it, but of course that was one of the concerns, going into the season, is that Ryan Fitzpatrick could leave you, or could leave you with more wins than you would want trying to get that number 1 pick, which ended up happening. But point is they did that, but also, and if you watch all my, post-game analysis videos, I detail all the ways in which they sabotaged the team, not just from how they built it personnel-wise, but actions that they did and exhibited on the field, choices that they made, etc., both in personnel usage, who they decided to put on the inactives list, play calls that they did, etc. So they did just enough. They left Ryan Fitzpatrick because if they would have gone 0-16 if they left Rosen in there. It's possible, right? Especially because he's got tons of flaws. He's a young guy. He's built up some bad habits because he's been put into some bad situations, and he doesn't have that motivating factor for any of the guys around him. So he doesn't really have a lot going for him in any of those cases, and so we could have ended up losing all the games. But they did decide to do that, and so they do get some credit for that. But the rest of the data also has to be taken into account, and overwhelmingly it says that they tried to sabotage this team to lose as much as possible so they wouldn't drop out of, let's say, the top 5, okay? So they could still have a high enough pick so that way they could use that draft capital that they accrued, including potentially multiple first-round picks, to move up to the number 1 spot anyway. They're like, what, we want to make sure that we've been telling everybody that we weren't tanking, even though we literally did everything that constitutes a tank, but we want them to believe it. And a lot of people are foolish and don't, they just believe what we tell them. So they're going to believe it if we say it, and then we win a few games. Like, the fact that we won 5 games is irrelevant to the fact that they tanked. They absolutely did it. They 100% instituted a tanking philosophy and executed it. And so, but they won those few games so they could at least put on this appearance and this show as if, no, see, I told you we weren't tanking. We won 5 games. They way over, performed, etc. And I would agree that they overperformed. I wouldn't say way overperformed, but they were still garbage. They were still garbage across the board. They were still in the back half of, or in somewhere between 29 and 30th in almost every single category. Our defense was shit. Our offense was shit. We were shit. We were complete shit. And somehow that's a miraculous fucking, overperforming. Okay, whatever, I guess, if that's the weird fucking world that you live in. But, it was a disaster. Absolute disaster. Anyway, so look, I mean, they absolutely could trade up to the number 1 pick. There are still people to this day that is like, no, they're not going to do that, even though all of the data all of the data suggests. Anyway, but let's look a little bit more at what Armando had to say about what you actually move up to the number 1 pick, right? Because it has actually happened multiple times in recent history. But he takes a look in large part at what happened to the players who were picked at number 1 overall. And the Dolphins' planned attempt at trading with the Cincinnati Bengals to get Burrow might yield fruit. But even if successful, it wouldn't guarantee the Dolphins would get the best NFL quarterback out of this draft, because maybe that will be Tua Tagovailoa, or Justin Herbert, or Jordan Love, or someone else in the entire rest of the field. And I'm not being trite here. NFL people are saying this to me privately from their homes, of course. Sure, they think Burrow's going to be better than the other guys, but they also admit that they don't know. And that's sensible, because you don't know. You just don't know. There are a million factors and a million things that could happen that could completely derail it. He could even, like, Patrick Mahomes is special, but one wrong injury and the dude could be done for the rest of his career. God forbid, knock on wood, whatever, right? So, like, it's just absolutely absurd. That's why the whole, like, we just have to get our quarterback mentality is just foolish. Because you're constantly going to be chasing a dream that is almost impossible to fulfill or bring to reality. Because you might get that guy and he might even perform well for you for a year or two, but then what if he gets that injury? What if this happens? What if that happens? Blah, 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 blah. It's just absurd. Anyway, and you know what the NFL's current free agency period just did for these personnel people? It proved no one knows anything, because Cameron Newton is an unrestricted NFL free agent quarterback, and no one has signed him since he was released by the Carolina Panthers on March 24th. That release, by the way, came after the Panthers tried unsuccessfully to trade Newton. Newton was the number 1 overall selection in the 2011 NFL Draft. Also, Jameis Winston is an unrestricted NFL free agent quarterback. No one has signed the 26-year-old since he was released by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on March 22nd. And those are a couple examples of first-round quarterbacks who are, you know, I mean, Cam Newton went to the Super Bowl, okay, so one time. But other than that, what have they done, right? Jameis Winston, RG3, Tim Tebow. I mean, even like Carson Wentz and Jared Goff. I mean, they're kind of, you know, they've had their ups and they've had their downs, right? But they're not world beaters. You know, Dwayne Haskins with the Washington Redskins last year, obviously not that great for his first season. Josh Rosen looking, I mean, there's so many examples. It's absurd. Anyway. Where was I? So let's see. That release came after Winston threw 30 interceptions in 2019, and the Bucs decided 42-year-old Tom Brady was an upgrade. Winston was the number 1 overall selection in the 2015 NFL Draft, and Jadeveon Clowney is an unrestricted free agent. No, he's not a quarterback, but he's more proof that owning the first overall selection isn't exactly all it's cracked up to be. Absolutely true, because you just never know. That's why chasing and overspending, etc., is foolish. And that's why time and time again, you know, GMs and blah, 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 front office guys get made to look like fools because they are fools. Anyway, the truth is the number 1 overall selection is a big deal, but rarely gets a team to its goal. A worst to best storybook tale, which again, to the impossible dream. That's what it always, if you get the number 1 pick, that means you were the worst team in the league that year. So you want to go from worst to best in a blink of an eye. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't, especially when you're talking about sustained success. You can have one-offs where, you know, they come back the next year and super overperform and blah, 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 but there's often a lot of factors that created that situation. So maybe another team, you know, loses their quarterback or what have you, or they just catch them on the right day, or the ball bounces the right way, or whatever, right? Like, as a Dolphins fan, I love to hang my hat on the 1972 season, but if we're being objective and fair, a lot of that's luck. A lot of it's just luck, right? We're lucky as Dolphins fans that we get to have that. But with the direction that this team is being taken in, I feel as Dolphins fans, we should be upset by it. Anyway, the fact is, history shows terrible teams that followed their terribleness with the first overall pick often failed to resolve that terribleness. And even when they did, those picks didn't really get them to a Super Bowl win. At least not yet. Consider the number 1 at least not yet. In 50 plus years of the NFL going on, Hasn't happened yet, but maybe, and maybe the Dolphins are the right ones to get it. Okay, I guess. Sure, it's possible. It's absolutely possible. Is it probable? Not very. Consider the number 1 overall selections in the past 15 years. 2005, quarterback Alex Smith didn't win a championship in San Francisco, went to Kansas City where he didn't win a championship, and then was traded to Washington where he suffered a terrible leg injury in 2018 and hasn't played since. 06, defensive end Mario Williams didn't win a championship with the Houston Texans, didn't win one with the Buffalo Bills, who grew wary of him and cut him, didn't win one with the Dolphins in 2016, his only season on the team and his final season in the NFL. 07, quarterback Jamarcus Russell didn't win a championship with the Oakland Raiders, although he might have won some burger eating contests. He lasted 3 seasons and never played again. First overall pick, another quarterback in round 1, the first overall pick in 2007. 2008, offensive tackle Jake Long. He won a Super Bowl. Wait, no he didn't. He played 5 seasons for the Dolphins, the last 2 battling injuries. He went to the Rams where he battled injuries for 2 years, and then he bounced around another couple of years as a reserve. 2009, quarterback Matthew Stafford. He has not won a championship with the Detroit Lions, and despite every gift known to the quarterback position, strong arm, accuracy, size, work ethic, makeup, good mobility, he has not delivered, and the Lions have had 3 different coaches with Stafford at quarterback. Are you seeing a pattern here? And they're not exactly trending in the right direction. And let's also note, again, another one of Bill Belichick's disciples that's trying to replicate what New England managed to do for a couple decades, but failed. Almost none of Bill Belichick's disciples have succeeded when becoming head coaches. Mike Vrabel is certainly the closest, and that's because he seems to be the smartest out of all of them. 2010, quarterback Sam Bradford, another first round and first overall quarterback pick that didn't pan out. He should be a cautionary tale for Dolphins fans who want the team to draft Tua Tagovailoa, because Bradford was great at Oklahoma. He won the Heisman Trophy, but he was often injured, and the St. Louis Rams drafted him number 1 overall, and that's right, he was often injured. Bradford was injured in 3 of his 5 seasons with the Rams. He was out of the league after 2018 at the age of 31. 2011, Cam Newton. He was not a bust. He helped the Panthers get to the Super Bowl, but lost it. And I'm sure Dolphins fans would donate body parts if their next quarterback gets similar results. But with respect, not winning the Super Bowl is not the stated goal. But it's also, right, the first goal is get to the playoffs. The next goal is get to the playoffs consistently. Then you work your way up, win an AFC championship, win an AFC conference title, get to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl. But then even after you do that, you want to still maintain consistent success, have winning seasons, continue to get back to the postseason, be contenders for the Super Bowl. Maybe not necessarily every year, because you're going to have some down years, but, you know, regularly, right? 2012, quarterback Andrew Luck. This guy is the best player of the lot, and his story is the scariest. Because despite his amazing gifts and ability to lift an entire franchise on his shoulders, Luck was unable to get the Indianapolis Colts to the Super Bowl, and he lasted 6 seasons, of which he played 5, and poof, he was done, gone like a vapor. So even when your team hits a home run, it might not actually be a home run. God, like, I mean, and this is why I said he's a logical guy, because all of this is absolutely true and makes total sense. Nothing is a guarantee, and this is a massive gamble, one that will almost assuredly not pay off. 2013, and I mean, especially too, like, really, do we honestly think that Stephen Ross is the guy? I mean, put fucking, you know, Chris Greer hasn't exactly had the best track record either. I think him and Adam Gase and them did great work in those drafts, but then he subsequently got rid of, like, all of those guys. I mean, like, he didn't even stand by the moves that he made that were right. Anyway, but he's been a part of the scouting department for the past, 15 years, and the Dolphins have been shit. But also, you know, that's in tandem with Stephen Ross's tenure. Like, he's really the one that we need to look at, and why I always say this team is never actually going to get better or to prominence where we want to be until Stephen Ross sells the team. Sign my petition if you think so as well. It's in the description box, a link to it. So, look, I mean, anyway, he's the problem, and as long as he heads this team, and as long as he's the owner and he's calling the shots and chooses the people that run the organization, The Dolphins are not going to get there. I mean, to be fair, he's still the owner, and he still has time, theoretically, but he's certainly running out of it, and his legacy is not very great. So, I mean, anyway. 2013, offensive tackle Eric Fisher. The Kansas City Chiefs didn't blow it here, but they didn't exactly get it right either. Fisher is 29 years old and will be the proud owner of a Super Bowl ring because the Chiefs won it all this past season, in which Fisher played only 8 games because of injury. And, of course, that's also because they now have not just Patrick Mahomes, but they have an amazing team almost entirely across the board, and a great coach. So, they have, and smart ownership and a smart front office. Anyway, 2014, Clowney. He has so much potential to be great. He's not great. Yeah, I mean, he's dealt with a lot of injuries too. I was going to say that's not necessarily fair, but I mean, honestly, he's been only kind of whatever to this point. 2015, Winston. It's hard to envision a scenario in which he signed to be some team's starter this season. 2016, quarterback Jared Goff. Understandably awful as a rookie, then he took off his second and third seasons, helping the Rams to the Super Bowl in the 2018 season. But last year, he was a disappointment, and the Rams didn't even make the playoffs. Now that team's window seems to be closing. 2017, edge rusher Myles Garrett. Outstanding talent, not outstanding discipline. The story is incomplete here. Fair. 2018, quarterback Baker Mayfield. He's good from far, but he's also far from good. The story is incomplete here. Also true. But let's take a pause there. The Browns, who have taken tons of quarterbacks in the first round and failed on almost every single one of them, including Tim Tebow, right? But they are the team that everybody's like, oh, look, man, this is how tanking works in the NFL, and this is how you can be successful doing it. First of all, the Dolphins did a much deeper tank than they did. We were fortunate enough that we didn't have to withstand an 0-16 season last year, or 1-15. However, we have a lot farther to go than the Browns did. And they're in year 5 of their so-called tank/rebuild? And where are they? They haven't even achieved success, let alone gotten to the point of maintaining consistent success. And so how can you say that that is successful? They haven't gotten there. They haven't attained success at all, but they're successful. A lot of people seem to think that the Browns are the gold standard for how to tank, and that the Dolphins are going to be just fine because look at the Browns. Okay, whatever. 2019, quarterback Kyler Murray. He was a rookie last season. We shall see what happens next. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. He had an he was with the Cardinals, right? He had an okay season, but he was the guy that they brought in to replace Josh Rosen, who they took 10th overall the year before that. So, we'll see what happens. I mean, he's still got a long way to go, but I mean, so far it's just been all right. And obviously the Cardinals weren't great last year. The point here is having the number 1 overall selection is not the fix-it that large swaths of the media portray it to be. And large swaths of the fan bases, not just for the Dolphins, but across the league, soak up and believe because that's what the vast majority of mainstream says. Quarterback, quarterback, quarterback. And that's what they drill into everybody's heads. It's just all about the quarterback. You get that special guy. And then the funny thing is oftentimes they take special talents and squander it and ruin their careers because they do other foolish things. Anywho, where was I? Let's see. And the Dolphins, as you have read in this space, will make an attempt at that opportunity at some point. It could be in vain because the Cincinnati Bengals are said to highly value the number 1 pick. So go over that history of the past 15 years again and explain to me why the Dolphins should want that pick so badly. I think holding multiple first-round picks is better than owning the number 1 overall pick most years. That includes this year. And I totally agree with that. In fact, again, I would, even trade back and accrue more capital, etc., if, a good opportunity presented itself. I wouldn't go up. I wouldn't trade up at all. In fact, though there was, let's see if I can find it. There was a tweet, which is absurd. So, okay, here it is. Armando Salguero tweeted out, sources told the Herald the Dolphins will make an attempt to trade the number 1 in the draft. Recent history says don't do it. And then he linked his article. Daniel Jeremiah retweeted that with this. If I'm the Bengals, I wouldn't trade off the first pick. However, for fun, let's play this out. I would tell Miami, get to Detroit's spot, 3rd pick, and then give me a call. I'm not dropping past the 3rd spot. First of all, if they did that and the Dolphins acquiesced and bit and traded a portion of their draft capital to move up to the number 3 spot, which would probably be overpaying because the Detroit Lions would absolutely drive up the price, as would other teams trying to move up to that spot to get a quarterback. And so they would have to overpay to get to the number 3 spot, but then they would have to overpay again to get to the number 1 spot, because both of those teams would know how desperate the Dolphins are to do it and how much Stephen Ross doesn't give a fuck and will just throw whatever amount of capital he feels necessary because he doesn't care. He just thinks that that's the solution. You just throw money or draft picks at it and that's going to solve your problem, when clearly that doesn't work. That would be one of the stupidest fucking things that they could ever do. Literally, I would have, I don't know, an aneurysm or something if they did that. My brain would stop functioning. I wouldn't be able to fathom why they thought that would be a good idea. Anyway, actually, there is another article that I want to read to you because it goes into this. 3 reasons the Dolphins will trade up for Tua Tagovailoa. I actually did want to make a video about this, but since I made this one and it all ties together, this will be a good time to talk about it. With only a few, because it goes to the point about how it's nearly inconceivable that the Dolphins will not trade up at all, right? The likelihood of them staying at number 5, or even more so trading back, is so monumentally small because of all the other data that we have. Sure, they could surprise us all. Maybe last minute they decide to do it, right? And trade back or something like that. But with everything, all the moves that they've made, etc., they've literally been building up to this one point. And so they make that point here in this article. So let's go over it. This is from 24/7 Sports. With only a few weeks remaining before the 2020 NFL Draft, the quarterback conversation is heating up nationally as several teams inside the top 10 try and get in position to draft a potential franchise signal caller in the first round. Hence, why no matter where the Dolphins trade up to, whether it's only to the number 3 spot, whether it's only to the number 1 spot, or whether they do some stupid shit to trade to the number 3, then to the number 1 spot, they're going to overpay for it no matter what. Other teams are going to force them. So either if they want to do it, they're going to have to overpay. Anyway, Cincinnati, who holds the first pick, and Miami at number 5 overall, are the two most talked about teams eyeing an elite player under center. NFL insider Lance Zierlein recently projected these two to swap multiple picks so that the Dolphins could then take Joe Burrow at number 1. If that doesn't happen, Miami will almost assuredly move up to make sure Tua Tagovailoa is still on the board after Washington picks at number 2. Knowing that I need a franchise quarterback and I may have my eyes set on the one I want, what would it take for me to move out of there? Quite honestly, it would probably take 2 1s, 2 2s in order for me to get out of there, ESPN analyst Louis Riddick said on Monday. If you're Miami, does that mean we swap spots in the first round, then we take your other 2 first-round picks as well? Do we then take a 2 as well? And that's possible. Teams have recently done that, given away 3 first-round picks and a second-round pick to move up to the number 1 spot. It wouldn't be unprecedented at all. And the Dolphins have so much draft capital, they could easily do it, but it's feasible, and it's probable, in fact. So let's see. It would have to be a ridiculous haul, especially considering where I'm at. The Dolphins have reportedly been a key player in Tagovailoa's corner for years, and even got an up-close look at him at the Citrus Bowl in January prior to the interview process at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. And they did try and bring him in prior to the shutdown. But look, again, and here's the thing, the bottom line. The Dolphins are going to trade up, and they're going to trade up to whatever spot that they feel necessary to get whatever quarterback it is, whether it's Tua, whether it's Herbert, whether it's Burrow, that Stephen Ross loves. Whichever quarterback he makes his mind up on, that's the quarterback they're going to go chase, and believe me, they will chase him. Former NFL quarterback and current ESPN NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky believes Tagovailoa to the Dolphins is a lock and gave 3 reasons on Monday why Miami isn't going to pass up on the opportunity of taking its top player on the board. Reason number 1, Miami won't make the same mistake twice. This is the organization that, 12 or 13 years ago, passed on the opportunity to bring in Drew Brees because of fear of injury. Orlovsky said during Monday's appearance on First Take, ever since that decision, they've been trying to find their Drew Brees. Now, obviously, there's a lot of regret there. I think, as you guys know, I think that they were perfectly fine with Ryan Tannehill. And again, if you know my philosophy, you don't have to have, a once-in-a-lifetime quarterback to fucking, whatever, succeed. The dude just got to fucking the AFC Championship game, and they're looking poised to take over their division and start, pushing for championships on a regular basis. Now, obviously that might not happen, but they're poised to do that at this particular time with Ryan Tannehill leading the way. And not only did they get a contract extension with him, but then they franchised Derrick Henry. And yes, they lost Jack Conklin, but they still have the majority of that offensive line, and they have plenty of picks to build, their team, whatever holes that they have. And they don't need to chase anybody. They can play smart, and they can build, wisely. And so they are in a great position to continue having success. Anyway, prior to the NFL Combine, Nick Saban used the exact comparison and said he believes Tagovailoa's knowledge of the game will go a long way in his professional development. Let's note, though, real quick, that the injuries are pretty substantially different. Most of Drew Brees's were upper body injuries to his shoulder, etc., and those are significant, but those are a lot easier to come back from than 2 ankles and a hip over the course of a entire career, especially in an NFL where mobile quarterbacks are like the thing. So he's going to be expected to be on the move, even if he has a good offensive line and doesn't necessarily need to all the time because he's constantly under pressure. I think he's a lot like Drew Brees. I always thought Aaron Rodgers was a lot like that as a player too, Saban said in February. Not overly big, accurate with the ball, really good judgment, decision making. Those guys are the style of player. I would never say the expectation should be he would accomplish what those guys have. I'd never want to put that on a guy. But they do. But these teams and fans, they do. They needlessly put that kind of pressure on them, and then that makes it even harder, and then etc., etc. But that's the style of player he is. Earlier this month, Riddick called Tagovailoa the best thrower in this draft and believes Miami's power brass feels the same way about him. He is a quintessential natural thrower of the football. I've said this numerous different times, Riddick said last week on Get Up. All things being equal, we know that they aren't, but for the sake of evaluation, he would be the number 1 overall pick for me had he had no injury history at the likes at which he does. And look, I understand, the purpose of hypothetical thought, right, and philosophy, etc., but there's not really much point in going into this, right? Like, he's like, all things being equal, I know they're not, but let's, look at it as if they are, but they're not. And this is one of those things where it's not something small, right? It's not like, so it'd be one thing to say that, like in the quarterback conversation, right? If every quarterback had an amazing team around him, right, then every quarterback would play at a higher level than what most quarterbacks do, right? If they had an amazing defense that could stop the other team and get them the ball back, and if they had amazing wide receivers and tight ends and a great offensive line and a good running game, then every quarterback would be able to perform at a higher level. But it's proven that when things are not equal, right, and then things get exposed, and he's got significant injuries. It's not something you can just ignore. It's not a factor that you can take out and be like, well, if this didn't exist, then whatever. Okay, but it does exist, and you're not going to be able to just erase it no matter how much you try, or how many philosophical conversations you have about what would or could happen if that wasn't the case, right? So it can be fun, but it's pretty useless overall. Anyway, He is just that natural as far as his decision making in the pocket. His accuracy at all three levels of the field, his ability to throw on the move, his ability to execute any offense that you need him to execute. Again there, ability to throw on the move. But if he's always on the run, etc., he's got those ankles and a hip. Pretty substantial injuries. And look, if he goes to a team, let's say he goes to the Dolphins and the offensive line again is trash and he's constantly getting bruised and battered like, let's say, Josh Rosen was in his first 2 seasons in the NFL when he was in the game, he might develop bad habits, much like Josh Rosen has, because, you know, I mean, Josh Rosen was touted as this super smart guy, etc., and I don't doubt that. And again, I've defended him and said that I think that he could be a damn good quarterback in this league. But he has significant flaws that have been exacerbated because of the fact that he has now compounded it with additional issues, because now his mental state's not quite there, right? Like, I'm not saying like he's losing it or he's crazy, but like he second guesses himself, right? He doesn't, you know, whatever. He might not plan his feet, or he might not, whatever, right? His body, one of the things he had problems with in 2019 was his body language, right? And that's because he's developed bad habits. It's possible that over, you know, extended period of time of getting hammered and, you know, not having success, losing, blah, 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 that could wear on him. So as great as he might be, if he goes to the Dolphins and then gets pummeled, well, he might start making bad decisions because he's seeing ghosts, you know, or whatever. Unfortunately, like Sam Darnold was last year at one point, right? So, anyway, he's not going to be a Cam Newton type of running threat in that way, but as far as a thrower of the football that can absolutely put horsepower behind it with tremendous touch, he is a fantastic football player, and it's a shame that we're having to discuss the fact that he is coming off the kind of injury that he is. It might be a shame, bro, but that's reality. That's the world, and that's life. And now every single report has been that he's ahead of schedule and blah, blah, blah. That's concern for me. Again, I would always give guys, because how often do we see, oh, he's ahead, and then, you know, re-injury, or that he gets put, you know, he gets rushed back, especially with star players. Who thinks that if the Dolphins do get Tagovailoa, that they're not going to throw him into the starting lineup immediately? He's going to be their shiny toy that they most likely traded up to go get, etc., and all these reports are glowing that he's fucking, you know, he's putting out these videos where he appears to be moving well. But that's a lot different than live action when you're getting pummeled by 300-pound defensive linemen. Just saying. So, anyway, reason number 2, Miami set itself up for this with previous moves. One of the things that I've been saying, Orlovsky. Last year, they traded away Minkah Fitzpatrick for a first-round pick and Laramie Tunsil for a first-round pick. They did not trade away good players to just go acquire other good players. They traded those good players to acquire draft picks to make sure they were equipped to go get the player they wanted to go get this year. The proof is in the pudding for the Dolphins, who have been shipping assets elsewhere in preparation to land a top-end quarterback during the 2020 NFL Draft. ESPN NFL draft analyst Mel Kiper Jr. believes Miami is the best situation for Tagovailoa, a player he ranks 5th overall on his big board and the second best quarterback behind Burrow. I can't imagine how people honestly think that that's the case. Again, there is a possibility that that's true and they could possibly have success, but the probability, the likelihood is that things are not going to go as planned. And I mean, it could end up, there is potential, especially if it ends up being a situation where he does get pummeled behind a non-existent or bad offensive line, then what if he gets injured again? And what if that hip injury is so bad the next time that it completely, you know, derails his entire career? Well, then it's all a waste and the kid's career is over because of it. Whereas if he went to a better place where, let's say, one, he could redshirt for a whole year, get as healthy as possible, and then also potentially be in a place where he's actually going to have at least adequate protection and a solid run game, blah, 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 then maybe he has a chance to go on and overcome it and have a long career, etc. But, I mean, it depends, man. It depends. Anyway, It would be a good situation in Miami for Tua, Kuiper said during a recent appearance on SportsCenter. You're picking at number 5, not picking at 1. So that whole tanking for Tua, you're still getting him, though because of the injury. That tanking for Tua was a joke from the get-go anyway. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. First of all, it's not a joke simply because the vast majority of Dolphins fans firmly believed it, and a lot of them want that shit. So on that basis alone, it's not a joke. It wasn't a joke to them. They want that. It's stupid. But it's not a joke because they tanked. They fucking tanked, man. Like, how more, like, clear does it need to fucking be? They can say all they want, but the proof is in the pudding, as they say, and their actions speak far louder than their words do. And they proved through their actions that they were tanking. Anyway, continuing on. You get him at 5 and you can bring him along coming off the injury. Do you redshirt him? Remember, Patrick Mahomes didn't have an injury, but he still redshirted his first year because they were smart. This Dolphins organization is not going to do that. Whatever quarterback they chase, and maybe that's part of the reason why they are considering going up to the number 1, and maybe that's why it's made it more likely, right, that they're going to do that, because Burrow doesn't have those injuries, and they can unquestionably put him in as the day 1 starter, not having to worry about the injury history. But maybe he flames out and he's not as good as everybody hopes. We'll see. Anyway, so only played in that final regular season game with Alex Smith being their quarterback. Here you have Ryan Fitzpatrick. You can bring Tua along. If he's ready, fine. Give him some playing time. If he's not, you put him on the shelf for a year and you get him ready for season number 2 in the NFL for a guy that certainly as a pure quarterback is as good as it gets coming out of the collegiate ranks in a lot of years. Now, if the Dolphins stayed put, picked him at number 5, and then redshirted him, I still wouldn't really agree with that approach overall because you know my philosophies, but that would be certainly a lot better than trading up to the number 3 or higher to go chase him, give away that draft capital, throw him into the fire right away, and potentially get him injured again while subsequently also having a shitty year, right? So, you know, that situation would be better, but not the ideal situation from my perspective, and certainly not what I would do. Reason number 3, Dolphins can't stomach success of the team that does pick him. Orlovsky, but again, I mean, just because we pick him, right? Like, I've heard this conversation. You know, would we rather take him and risk somebody else having and risk him getting injured or fizzing out with us, or let somebody else take him and him have success there? I mean, it's not that simple. It's not that fucking simple, man. Because if he does get picked by somebody else and has success there, well, what are the other factors that played into that? Did he have a good offensive line? Does he have good coaching? Did they redshirt him for a year or throw him right into the fire? Right? All of that is massively important. It's not just black and white. It's not either we take him and, you know, like it's not that fucking simple. Anyway. Orlovsky, imagine this world where they sit back this year and take their 3 first-round picks and someone jumps them to go get Tua. With those 3 picks, they go on to win 7 or 8 games next year. Then next draft, they'll be going into year 3 of a rebuild without a quarterback and asking the same question they are this year. Who will be our franchise quarterback? Which, yeah, I don't find conceivable. Stephen Ross has made it abundantly clear they're going to go get somebody. For those 3 reasons, I don't think there's any chance the Dolphins are going to sit there at number 5 and hope Tua falls to them. They will go get Tua, or possibly Burrow. The potential fly in the ointment for the Dolphins is the Washington Redskins at number 2. So are the Panthers, so are the Jaguars, so are the Chargers, so are the Lions. There are so many wild cards and teams that could take quarterbacks or that could trade around to get quarterbacks or whatever. There's tons of that. Tons of that. Right? So, anyway, it's not just, there's like a bunch of flies in the ointment. Anyway, but in this one, Todd McShay believes Washington could take Tagovailoa if his medical checks out and the Redskins aren't sold on Dwayne Haskins, last year's first-round quarterback selection. Now, is it inconceivable that a team that just took a first-round quarterback last year would take one this year? No. We just saw the Arizona Cardinals do it. That's why we got Josh Rosen. Let's see. Yes, I would, but I would have to have a lot more information on the medical, McShay said last month. But if my doctors were saying that he is progressing and we don't forecast it being an issue moving forward, then yeah, I would think long and hard about not passing on Tua Tagovailoa, because if he's healthy, and I know he's going to be healthy, he doesn't know that though. I don't know how he could possibly know that for sure, but he says that. I put him right up there with Joe Burrow, and I've said before I would lean Tua over Burrow because I think he's special. But the reality is Dan Snyder's not going to let that happen as the owner, from what I understand. He thinks Dwayne Haskins is the guy, and they're going to build around him, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, but they could trade back, potentially. Anyway, whatever. So look, at the end of the day, there's about a million possibilities. I think that, again, from my perspective, the Dolphins are absolutely going to trade up. They're going to not only trade up, but they are going to package a large deal, because they are going to be forced to overpay due to the various different factors. Stephen Ross's craven desperation, the other teams potentially trying to trade up, other teams that the Dolphins want to trade with knowing how desperate they are and will milk them, etc., etc., etc. Again, I'm still slightly leaning to the number 3, but I'm about as convinced as I could be. It might just take another day or two of some additional reports and data, but to me, it's the number 3 by a slight bit, but the likelihood of the number 1 pick being traded for is super high. And so the only question remains, or questions that remain at this point in my mind, are where do they trade up to? How much draft capital do they give away to get there? And then who do they take? And then obviously how do they go about dealing with that player? Do they throw him in right away? Blah, 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 blah. So anyway, that is what I got. That is a long video. It's going to be like almost an hour long. There was a lot to talk about there. Some good perspectives. Again, I didn't agree with most of it. A lot of it I agreed with, especially what Armando had to say, because it's just rooted in fact and logic and what have you. So, but it's good to have different perspectives and to, have as much data and information as you possibly can to make the best and most accurate evaluations that you can. And so hopefully I'm able to do that. And with that, I hope you guys do enjoy it. And I hope that you guys do like my content. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.